Alli, it is such a pleasure to welcome you to the HN House podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
You're a woman who needs no introduction here. And for those who don't know, Alli is the brilliant mind behind Drybar. So I think we've all been to a Drybar at some point in our life here. And you recently just wrote a book called The Messy Truth that just launched. And I'm excited to chat because what really resonated with me, which we just spoke about before, is that as a founder, the book really kind of like pulls back the curtain a little bit and just allows people to also just feel a little bit more authentic with themselves. And I know this is going to resonate with the H and House community because that's everything that we stand for here. It's really just pulling back the curtain and showing people, what it really means to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
So we talk a lot about the real truth about entrepreneurship and the not so sexy side of things, and just so happy that more founders are pulling back the curtain. So let's dive in here. You embrace the mess in this book. I mean, quite literally, right? Talking about on the title, what's happening. And I love that this was a core theme throughout the entire process in your book. At what point, I'm just curious, in your journey, did you realize that this was part of your identity?
Mm.
When did you realize that this was gonna be a core part of this book?
Well, I appreciate, your perspective. And I think that there is this I think we are starting to break down this kind of glamorized version of being an entrepreneur, which is great, how much attention entrepreneurs are getting and that entrepreneurs are really having a moment and, kind of like this new, you know, cool club to be in. But it's messy as shit, and I don't think that, um, I just don't, I'm just so transparent as a person, or at least I try to be. And
Mhm.
there's so much, it's so both and there's so many things that are so amazing. And like, listen, my life changed for the better in a million ways. My life also really fucking fell apart in a lot of ways. And
Mhm.
it's just life, and that is everybody's story. And I have
Yeah.
found, and I think the reason I've been more compelled to really tell my story in as most authentic way as I can, because I know that's what resonates with people, because everyone's, dealing with everything I'm dealing with, whether you're like an entrepreneur and founder of a company or a CEO, or you're, an account executive, or whatever your role, or your life, your job is, no one's escaping the messiness that we all
Yeah.
experience, from like divorce and heartbreak and rehab and,
Mhm.
and bankruptcy and like just all the stuff. There's just so much that goes alongside the good and the bad, and I'm definitely living proof that with like we've all heard this, without the darkness there is no light. It's just two sides of the same coin that I've experienced, with really high highs and really low lows. So I don't know what your question was anymore, but that's what came to me.
And I really resonate with that too. And I openly share this, on my podcast. I actually went through a miscarriage a year ago, and I
Sorry.
went through grief. I, lost my biological father, like running my company. And, like no one prepares you for the scale, like what it actually takes to also go through the hardship, but then also have to show up for your business at the same time and show up for your team at the same time. A lot of women in our audience, a lot of them are ex-corporate, a lot of them come from professional backgrounds, and a lot of them are feeling, this pressure to look polished and look professional, which is kind of on that same thread of, being authentic to yourself. What are your thoughts and recommendations on just even your words of advice on releasing the pressure around showing up, in this way? Like, what are some of the things that worked well for you to almost release that thought if you did feel that way?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's again, two sides of the same coin. It's like obviously, like I built this empire on, quote unquote, looking your best. But I think what really under the looking your best was actually feeling your best. And I think that's
Mhm.
what Dry Bar has afforded to so many women. It's like, you can be having a really bad day and then go into Dry Bar and get a blowout, and it'll lift your spirits. So And then it's also, what I found is that a lot of women were not going into like an important meeting or a boardroom or whatever it was without a blowout,
Mhm.
just as like an extra layer of like armor and superpower, but I also think that there's on the same side of that, it's like also going in is like who you authentically are. And the example that comes to mind is for me, when we were first raising money and we were sitting in these rooms with private equity guys and there were, a bunch of men in suits and I felt really intimidated. And I remember saying to my brother, Michael, who's my business partner in Drybar, I was like, should I wear like a suit? I didn't know, I was like, do I, and this was like very early on. And he was like, no, I think go in as like yourself and like showing who you are and be your authentic self. And, he just had the presence of mind to know that because really at the end of the day, I didn't want to sell a version of me that wasn't authentic to me. It's like I'm outspoken. I have very strong opinions. I like, I think I wore like a bright like pink and yellow, like something
I love it.
crazy. Because I was like, this is where I was at that point. I do love a good suit, by the way, but more of the like me trying to fit into this, what I thought was the right thing to walk into a meeting like this, which I didn't. And there were definitely some investors that were like, did not understand me, did not understand the business. We're like, we're not
Mhm.
putting a bunch of money into that girl, which is fine. But it was, it really helped kind of eliminate and whittle down the people that weren't going to be the best business partners with us. So I think like I said, I think it's like you have to show up as your best self, but make sure
Mhm.
you're being your actual self. I think it's very easy for us to put on this like, this facade that's not necessarily true. It's kind of like, which I talk a lot about in the book, this like imposter syndrome, which has like a negative connotation where it's like, if you feel like an imposter, like it's because you're stepping into a role that you haven't done before. And so you're figuring it
Mhm.
out as you go, which is like pretty fucking awesome. And like when I was, running Drybar and when we started the company, I 100% knew way less than I actually knew. I had to figure out a lot. I had to ask a lot of questions. I had to make a lot of mistakes. And I did in the early days try to like hide that because I felt like I was supposed to have all the answers. I was supposed to know everything because I was the boss, and you're just supposed to know everything. And I've
Mhm.
come full circle to realize, a company is much better led by a leader who's like, "Hey, I'm not sure about this. What do you guys think?" And to create this environment where your team feels like a not scared to say what they really think because they're going to get in trouble or fired or demoted or whatever, and b just creating this environment where people feel really compelled to say what they really
Mhm.
think, to offer up their authentic feelings on something, which creates this environment of like, I want to work for a company like this. I want to work for somebody who lets me say what I really think, which always inevitably spurs on something else, and it's just such a great creative process.
I
So,
love that.
I mean, I think it all comes down to being like really your authentic self, which I think is we can all get kind of lost in like being what we think we
Mhm.
should be versus what we really are.
Ooh, that is so good. I hope listeners are just like pausing, jotting things down right now because this is so good. I'm in the process right now of developing an app and a new community social club, and it's so interesting. We're not raising any money yet, but we have been working on this, and I've been taking such a big risk. And what's really interesting is I resonate with that so much because this is like the first time in a while where I've really felt the imposter syndrome, but it's like stepping into that next level, which I love that you said that. So on the same thread of what we were talking about before, with the book itself, and I'm going to try not to spoil the book as much as possible. So you guys need to grab it. I'm going to put it in the show notes here. You talk a lot about, some of the transitions that you went through in life. You went through a lot of life experiences, good and bad, that you talk about, in the book, and you've had curveballs that were thrown at you. So, you talked a little bit how you kind of navigated that, but like, what are some of the things that you've done to really like now integrate like the business and life integration as you were going through that process, right? Anything that helped you when you were navigating some of those lows while running Dry Bar?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's a bit of a I want to say the word balancing act, but I actually have a chapter in the book that says balance is bullshit, which I believe.
Yeah.
Um, because it's not, it's, I think when I think of like the balance, balance isn't really the right word, because when you're
Mhm.
kind of having to summon yourself to the surface to do what
Yeah.
needs to get done. And even if you have that like pit in your stomach and you know that, like, in my case, I was going through a divorce and I had a son who was, we had to put in rehab, and it was
Mm.
just, it was brutal. And listen, I wanted to stay in bed and put the covers over my head, and I wanted to be sad, and I was, but I also had a lot of responsibilities to a lot of people. And so I had to, and my other son, and it's like I had to, like, I think that's the thing is, like, you have to be able to, summon yourself to the things that are needed in your life, which really are the things I think that help you get through those hard times and those hurdles. It's like, how am I showing up for other people? Like, how am I, showing up for all the things and people that need my attention,
Mhm.
versus being, and again, and I think that was kind of my experience. I mean, I was doing a lot of things. I was like going to therapy 3 times a week. I went to on-site,
Wow.
which I took like 6 days on-site. It's this amazing foundation that I'm actually on the board of. It's in Nashville, or an hour outside of Nashville, where it's a therapeutic center where you go. They have lots of different programs that you can do, but the one I did was like, you go, they take your phone for 6 days, which is
Mhm.
like fucking awesome too. I mean, it's so great
Mhm.
to, it feels hard in the moment, but then it's like, oh, it's so nice to not be on your phone. Um,
Mhm.
but it really gives you a chance to like decompress. And I really needed to take that time. And,
Yeah.
my team was very supportive of that because they knew what I was going through, which by the way, as a side note, you know, which I talk about a lot in the book and just in general, like, you're only as strong as your team, and having a great team of people around you, um, is that your business doesn't implode if something crazy happens in your life, or something that
Yeah.
demands your attention. And I definitely felt that, because I needed to take a little bit of time for myself, which, like, people should do if they need it, to like regroup. And I think we kind of live in a society that doesn't allow people to grieve things the way they need to, and give them
Mhm.
time. And so, but if you have a strong team around you and you have the opportunity, like I was lucky enough to have, to go get off the grid for a week and spend some real time with myself, and like, and because, again, this is not a new concept, but it's kind of like putting your oxygen mask on first. It's like, if you're not taking care of yourself first, you're kind of not going to be good to anybody else, and for me, that was kind
Mhm.
of what I was trying to get to, is like, I can't be great for my kids, or, my business and people I work with and the women who,
Mhm.
so beautifully support Drybar, if I'm not taking care of myself first and foremost. So I think that was kind of, um, how I approached it. And I read a ton of books and got as
Yeah.
much, like, knowledge as I could of how to navigate a really hard time. And I was somewhat transparent with it, like on social media and that kind of stuff, just as like, hey, my life isn't, it's not a party, it's not glamorous all the time, and
Mhm.
and I very much, believe in that. And some things I'm more private about. But anyways, yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
think it's all part of the journey.
I love that you said that, and that's something that we talk a lot about too at H and House as well, is like when I saw that balance is bullshit, I was like, "Yes." It's so true. We talk a lot about, like, the integration of it as well, so I just appreciated that. So kinda shifting gears here more towards, like,
Thank
the
you.
business side of things, you mentioned in the book about the rise and fall of good ideas, and that chapter was so real where you're talking about raising capital and going through a sale, and I have another friend of mine who her husband just went through a big acquisition as well, and I've just heard the highs and the lows of going through an acquisition. And you mentioned, you're going through the process of losing your identity, but it was kind of like that. I don't want to say breakdown before the breakthrough, but it allowed you to also see like what was next. So I'm just curious, like after, you sold Drybar and now you're looking at the future. At what point did you realize your new direction? Is it something where you had to kind of like settle into after the acquisition, this is what I want to do next? Or did that ultimately come to you? Did you know that beforehand?
No, no, no. I didn't, and I think you maybe said this before, like, my identity was so tightly wrapped up in Drybar that
Mm.
I've been very lost, frankly, since we sold Drybar. And I have been in this like, what am I doing now phase of my life, and what motivates me, and where's my purpose? And
Mhm.
again, to be totally transparent, I'm still in the throes of figuring that out. We've started a handful of other companies like Squeeze, which is our massage
Mhm.
concept, and which is, off to the races. It's doing incredibly well. And I mentioned Brittany Driscoll, who's our CEO and co-founder. 'Cause she was the head of marketing at Drybar, and she's just a powerhouse and amazing. And she's running that business. And then we have Okay Humans, which is a therapy concept that's also such a needed thing in the world.
Mhm.
And then Bright Side. So, and I have a jewelry company, and I'm hosting a mastermind, and obviously this
I
book.
love
And
it.
so, it is a lot. I mean, I think people look at my life like I must be so busy and crazy, but the business, those businesses now, I'm not in the day to day trenches, and by design, like by choice.
Mhm.
I don't have any desire to start a company from the ground up again, because again, anybody who's listening, and as you know, it is a lot of work, and you have to have like a certain like hunger, for it, and appetite for it. And I think, having been through it, and 10 years in dry bar, I didn't want to do that anymore. So yeah, I am in the process of still figuring that out, which I think the big secret is we are always in process, that there's always kind of like, what's next? What am I doing next? And one of the things, and I talk about this in the book, because it was such a profound moment for me when someone asked me after I had sold dry bar. It had been maybe a year and a half or something, and someone was like, how do you feel about selling the business? I was like, "Oh, I feel great. I'm so happy, like, to be out of it. And I feel like I did all I can do, and blah, blah, blah." And then they said, "How do you feel spiritually?" And I was like, "What?" And I was like,
Mhm.
I never thought about that question. And it really sent me on like a journey of like, oh my God, my identity is so wrapped up in this company. And now who am I? And I'm very much on that journey as we speak, trying to figure out where I am. And I think there's also just something, and I don't know the age demo of your readers, but I'm in my late 40s, and I think this just happens in this point in your life where you're like, you've been go, 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 go for so long. And now you're like, my kids are older, and I have a son in college, and another one who's going to be graduating soon. And it's just like now you're in a different life phase. And so what does that look like? And it reminds me very much of being in my 20s, different, but similar, of
Mhm.
like, oh, I'm kind of starting over in trying to figure out where I want to be spending my time. And it looks very different, but it is the same kind of, you know, battle of like, oh, what lights me up now? So
Mhm.
I'm in it trying to figure it out myself right now.
I love that. And, I'm just curious to, with the highs and lows of the acquisition itself, we actually have several people in our community that are, building their companies up to sell, or they might be in the
Yeah.
process or early stages of acquisition. I'm just curious if you can just like, even just like riff quickly on, obviously like what were some of the highs, but also maybe like what were some of the lows that some of the listeners can
Yeah.
maybe even just be prepared for as they're going through the process.
Yeah. I mean, I think first and foremost, if you're right, if you're starting a business to primarily sell it, you know, I how I wish you could see my face right now, people listening. But I think that for me anyways, isn't like the overarching reason to start a business. And it really was not
Mhm.
my if you're driven, I mean, listen, it's good to be driven by money, and we all are, of course, to some degree. But for me, when we were starting Dry Bar, I was very driven by like what we were doing, what we were delivering, like what I was able to like, how I was able to spend my time every day. I felt so lucky that that's what I
Mhm.
got to do. And then the fact that it blew up, and we realized we were really onto something, and we were going to, potentially sell this thing for millions of dollars. Like, yes, that's amazing. Like, wow, that wasn't though what I intended to do. So I just want to say that from the get go.
Mhm.
Like, if you're in this, I just want to like sell my business for millions, but I don't really love what I'm doing. Like, that just doesn't work. And most of the
Mhm.
time, and I'm not the only person who said that. I've read lots of books from lots of different leaders everybody kind of says this, because it's true that, you want to make sure you're coming from this as a place like, I love doing this no matter what the outcome is, first and foremost. That
Yeah.
said, when you are getting to the point where you're considering some sort of acquisition or going public, it it's a journey. And if you've raised money, it's a similar journey. It's like you're going through a formal process. It is as painstaking as anything you can imagine. It takes a very long time. People are not, my brother used to always say this, like people, rich people, private equity, whoever, like they're not giving up their money so fast. It is a very, to start with, like raising money, like being careful about who you take money from, because it is a marriage, and you really got to know who you're getting in business with, because it's just, it can go really badly. And I've seen it go both ways. We were really lucky that, Captain now known as Stride, they were
Mhm.
amazing, and we got lucky. But I've heard horror stories where they didn't get as lucky. But yeah, I mean, when you're deciding to sell your business, is a really good time to get, and before you're even near that stage, is to start vetting investment bankers and people who really understand your business and are going to be the ones, because that was my experience. Even though my brother led that more than I did, having people who knew who to go after when you're selling your business is incredibly important. And because
Mhm.
there's a million potential buyers, but someone who can really come in and narrow down how to really package and sell your business to the right people at the right time, at the right price. Like all of that stuff, you just don't know, unless you have great people around you who know that stuff. And that is, a big lesson throughout the book, and throughout my experience, is like bringing in people who are smarter than you in certain areas. Like we didn't know anything about selling a business, and I didn't know any of what I just
Mhm.
said before we went into this process. Um, so, recognizing what you know and what you don't know, and what you need help with, way ahead of time. It's also kind of our philosophy on
Yeah.
hiring. We brought in a president of retail way before. Well, we kind of needed her, but we were really high. We would always kind of hire ahead of the curve, because we knew that
Mm.
you don't want to be stuck where you're like, oh shit, I gotta hire this person, because then you're just backpedaling, you're maybe hiring the wrong person and all those things. I think it's the same thing as you start thinking about selling your business and what that might look like. That's the time to start, you know, talking to your friends who sold businesses, like listening to a podcast that, it talks more about that.
Mhm.
And really getting, I believe that knowledge is power, and really knowing how the process works, and talking to people
Yeah.
who have sold their business, so you can understand the ins and outs of it. I mean, it took us over a year to close the deal. I mean, it is a long, drawn out process. It's incredibly distracting to your business, just like raising money is. But so you got to be like ready for all of that. Sometimes that distraction can be really harmful to your business, and you don't want your business to start imploding while you're trying to. I mean,
Mhm.
it's a lot of different facets to it. And you really want to think all those things through before you start thinking about a sale.
Woo, this is so good. So many notes here, like mental notes. I'm like, I need to come back to this and listen to this. One last question on raising money, because you brought that up too, which is another thing that I think sometimes too in the entrepreneur world becomes this sexy, glamorized thing of, oh, I'm raising VC funding for my company. And you mentioned too that, well, yes, obviously it's great to expand the company, but also can be like a double-edged sword too, because you need to find the right people. Any tips or recommendations for people that might be thinking about wanting to expand their company and wanting to use VC money to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a really personal question. And, for us, I really struggled with raising money, because I had this, idea in my head that I didn't want to give up equity, which I think is like a pretty natural
Mhm.
stance of a lot of, founders. And what it was a conversation my brother and I had a lot of, like, do I want to own a small piece of a big pie or a big piece of a small pie? And it's like, obviously I want to own a small piece of a very big pie, which is really where things ended up going. But it's not, that's not the right answer for everybody. It's like you look at a business like Spanx, like, Sarah Blake, they didn't, I, I think I have this right, that they didn't raise any money. I mean, they just recently
Mhm.
did, but um, the majority of them, that company's been in business, I don't know, 20 something years, and they didn't raise money. And I'm pretty fucking envious of that, just because that wasn't my experience. And I was like, wow, she didn't, when they sold, I mean, it's crazy,
Mhm.
we weren't in that kind of position, because well, first of all, we knew that we needed to grow quickly, because we had a lot of people on our coattails.
Mhm.
we knew that if we wanted to be the market leader, which we became, we were going to have to move quickly. However, we could have made the decision, and we had lots of conversations about this. We could have, said, you know what, we'll grow more organically. But Drybar locations were expensive. Almost $500,000 to open a location. So it's not,
Mhm.
even though all of our stores were profitable, that we didn't have that kind of cash lying around to open more stores. So so we did need to go and raise money, and that was a choice to grow faster. I have friends who started companies and they have made the choice to not grow fast. Really respect that, to grow at a slower pace. Drybar we could have opened maybe 2 stores a year on our own ish,
Mhm.
2 or 3 stores. But we knew we needed to open more if we were going to really continue this and make it like into what it became. And that was the decision we made, and I think that as you're exploring raising money, it's like thinking about what's important to you as your end goal. It's such
Mm.
a personal decision. Like how do you want to grow? Someone who has whatever the business is and they have a couple shops and like they want to be able to be with their kids and they want to, have a certain lifestyle, like they might just be like, we're gonna chill here for a while
Mhm.
and then reevaluate in a couple of years when my kids are in school or whatever the case may be. So it's really personal because if the other side of that coin is that if you do raise money from VC or private equity or even angels to some extent, you have responsibility to a lot of other people. So
Mhm.
your business is not just your own anymore. You don't have that luxury of like, yeah, we're not going to raise money right now. We're going to stay at 3 stores and that feels right. It's like now you have that added pressure of like, oh, we gotta make money because we have investors. And the only reason people really invest in businesses is because they think they're going to get a return. And if you're, which is a whole other conversation of like, I just
Mhm.
spoke to an entrepreneur yesterday who was like, has this great business, but I'm like, I don't know who the buyer of this thing is because they wanted me to invest in it. And that is like,
Mhm.
that is a question that I think about and that I've gotten from people who I was trying to raise money from. It's like, I don't see a buyer in something like this, not in Drybar, but in other companies. So it's like, you also have to think about that, because again, back
Mhm.
to the first thing I said, that if you're in this only to sell it, you better know that too at the beginning, like who is a buyer, which, private equity is sometimes, and a lot of times a buyer, because they recognize a great
Mhm.
business. But these are all questions to ask yourself and to
Yeah.
and to ask other people in your world who've been down this road before, because it's really overwhelming and complicated.
It really is, but I feel like I just got an entire like MBA lesson just by this conversation. You are just incredible, and I have so many takeaways already from this short chat here. So now
Thank
that
you.
okay, driver acquisition done, you have this beautiful book that you just produced. We're getting close to 2024 here. What is next for you?
It's a very good question. There's I I mean, I don't know. My focus has very much been on this book for a long time and getting this
Mhm.
out the door. I'm really loving the mastermind that I have,
Mhm.
which is called Blueprint, which is like a 6-month container with like very
Mhm.
not established, but not completely established, but somewhat established, um, entrepreneurs who are looking to, I think that I don't know. The best way I think to answer your question in this moment is my kind of desire to serve and give back is what
Mhm.
I'm kind of choosing to focus on, and that's like largely through the mastermind, largely through my book, which is is much of a tutorial and like
Mhm.
like you said, getting a peek behind the curtain as possible to help other entrepreneurs. And I speak on a platform called Intro, which is where I'm talking to entrepreneurs about their businesses. And, I think that the way things are going is really in this give back mode. I also I volunteer quite a bit at CHLA in Los Angeles. And I really think that is where I am being called to. And I think a lot of that is, coming out of my own hard times and things that have been hard for me. The feedback I've gotten from the smart, more spiritual people around me is like, you gotta just give back, keep giving back, keep giving to
Mhm.
others, keep serving. And that is really where I'm kind of at this point in my life of like, how do I help out others? And that comes in the form of giving back a lot of entrepreneurial advice. Some of it's just giving my time to people who are in need.
Mhm.
And So I think that's the best
I
answer I
love that.
have. I don't know what 2024 is going to look like, but
Mhm.
that's what I got right now.
And I think you're doing such a beautiful job too, like you said, with intro, with the book, and just sharing that knowledge as well. So I just want to say thank you for coming on the podcast and just sharing it all. And I'm excited to, drop the link in here for our listeners and just appreciate you for taking the time out because I'm telling you, this was like a business school lesson in a podcast episode. So,
Oh, that's so nice.
um,
And it's funny to be in that kind of position because I certainly don't think of myself as that, but there is a lot of stuff stored up in my brain, which is again why I like being able to, impart whatever I can and help other people who are like need to hear stuff like this. So thank you for having
love
me.
it. Of course. And if you're listening to the podcast, share it on stories, share your key takeaways. I'll send you a DM and we'll be on for our next episode. Thanks so much.